My daughter called me on a Tuesday afternoon in February, and I knew something was wrong before she said a single word. It wasn't anything she said. It was the silence before she said it. That half second where I could hear her breathing, steadying herself. I've known that silence my whole life. I heard it the morning her mother was diagnosed. I heard it the night she called to tell me her dog had to be put down. A man learns the sound of his child trying to hold it together. Dad, she said. It's Grandma. My mother is 84 years old. She lives in the same house in Kitchener she's lived in for 41 years, the one with the green shutters that need painting, and the front walk that heaves every spring from the frost. She has arthritis in both hands, a pacemaker she got 3 years ago, and the stubbornness of someone who has outlasted every single person who ever told her to slow down. She still makes her own bread. She still shovels the front step before the city plow comes through, even though I've asked her 100 times to let me arrange someone to do it. She had fallen. Not badly, my daughter said. She didn't think anything was broken. But she'd gone down in the kitchen, reaching for something on the bottom shelf of the pantry, and she'd been on the floor for a while before she could get up. She didn't call me. She called my daughter instead, because, and I say this with every ounce of love in my heart, my mother would rather crawl across broken glass than let me know she needed help. I was at work when the call came in. I do estimating for a small construction firm in Cambridge, been there 11 years. It was 2:30 in the afternoon. I told my daughter I'd leave right away, and I called my wife to let her know I'd be heading straight to Kitchener and might be late for dinner. She didn't answer. I left a message. I got to my mother's house at 3:45. The sky was that particular gray you only get in Ontario in February, the kind that makes everything feel like it's already been abandoned. I let myself in with my key and found her sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea and a look on her face, like she was annoyed I'd shown up. I'm perfectly fine, she said before I even got my coat off. Her left wrist was bruised. She had a scrape on her forearm from the cabinet edge. She said she'd been on the floor for maybe 20 minutes before she got herself up by the counter. 20 minutes on a kitchen floor in February. I thought about that and didn't say anything, just put my hand on top of hers for a moment. She asked me if I wanted tea. I said yes. We sat together in her kitchen, and I watched her move around the stove, and I noticed for the first time, or maybe the first time I let myself really notice, that she was moving slower than she used to. There was a hesitation before she reached for things, a carefulness I hadn't seen before. Have you thought any more about those grab bars? I asked. In the bathroom. I don't need grab bars, she said. Mom, I've been using that bathroom since 1983. I didn't push it. We sat and drank tea, and she told me about her friend Edna from church, who had her hip done in January and was already up walking. And I nodded and made the right sounds, but I was thinking about that 20 minutes on the floor. My wife called back at 5:15. How is she? She asked, and her voice had a quality to it that I can only describe as efficient. Not warm. Efficient. I said my mother was okay, that I wanted to stay a bit longer and make sure she had a proper dinner, and that everything was settled for the night. There was a pause. We're having people over Friday. I know, I said. This is Tuesday. Another pause. Are you going to be late every night this week? I told her I didn't know yet. I said I'd be home by 8. She said okay and hung up, and I sat there with the phone in my hand for a moment, wondering when the question had shifted. From how is your mother to when will you be home for dinner? I should explain something about my wife and my mother. They have never been close. My wife, I'll call her what she is, which is the woman I've been married to for 27 years, came from a family where you kept to yourself. Emotions were handled privately. You didn't ask for help, and you didn't offer it unless asked. And even then you thought carefully about whether offering might be seen as intrusive. I understood that about her. I married her knowing that. For a long time it wasn't a problem. But my family is different. My mother is the kind of woman who shows up at your door with a casserole when you're sick, without being asked. Because in her world you don't wait to be asked. You just show up. And for 27 years, those two women in my life have managed a kind of polite distance that mostly worked. Until the last few years when my mother started needing more, and my wife started pulling back further. I made my mother soup that night from what she had in the fridge. Chicken stock, some carrots, half a bag of egg noodles, and I ate with her and watched the news and made sure the locks were checked and the lights were on in the hallway before I left. She hugged me at the door. She was wearing the same housecoat she'd worn as long as I could remember, blue terry cloth with a frayed cuff on the left sleeve. You don't have to come every day, she said. I know, I said. Your wife will get tired of it. I told her not to worry about that. The second call came 3 weeks later. It was a Thursday morning, just after 7. I was getting ready for work, standing at the bathroom mirror, and my phone lit up on the counter. The Kitchener number. I answered it, and my mother's voice was different, thinner. She said she'd had a rough night, that she hadn't slept well, that her chest felt a bit strange. I asked her what strange meant. She said she didn't know. Tight, maybe. Like a band. She said it was probably nothing, that she just wanted to let me know. I was already out of the bathroom and looking for my keys. Here's the thing about living 40 minutes away from your elderly mother. 40 minutes is nothing, and 40 minutes is everything, depending on the moment. Most days it's nothing. Some mornings, like that morning, it feels like an ocean. My car was in for its winter service. I'd dropped it at the dealership the night before, a thing I'd arranged weeks ago, and I was planning to take it in the afternoon when it was ready. I hadn't thought about it. Why would I? You don't plan for a 7 a.m. call about chest tightness. My wife was still home. She works from home 3 days a week, and Thursday was one of those days. She was in the kitchen with her coffee and her laptop when I came down. I need to take your car, I said. I didn't ask. I want to be honest about that. I didn't ask, I said I needed it. She looked up from her screen. I have calls all morning. My mother thinks something might be wrong with her chest. Shouldn't you call an ambulance? I had thought about that. I want to be honest about that too. The reason I didn't was my mother. She has this fear of ambulances, irrational and deep-seated, ever since my father was taken away by one and didn't come back. She will not get in one without fighting every step of the way, and the stress of fighting her into one, at her age, with a pacemaker, felt like the wrong call. I needed to get there myself, assess, and then take her in if that's what it needed. I explained this to my wife in about 30 seconds. She said, I don't know when I'll need the car. I stood in my own kitchen and looked at my wife of 27 years, and I felt something shift in my chest that had nothing to do with my heart. I felt it go quiet. It's my mother, I said. I know, she said, but I have responsibilities too. I called my daughter. She was 45 minutes the other direction, just outside Hamilton. She said she was on her way. I called a cab. One of the old regular cab companies, not an app, because sometimes you just want to know there's a driver who will actually show up. The dispatcher said 12 to 15 minutes, and I stood in the front hallway with my coat on waiting and said nothing more to my wife. The cab came in 9 minutes. The driver was a man named Baljit, who told me he used to take his own mother to dialysis every Tuesday and Thursday for 2 years. He drove faster than I would have asked him to, and I appreciated it. My mother was sitting in her chair when I got there, upright, with the look of someone trying very hard to appear fine. Her color wasn't right. I sat next to her and asked her to describe what she was feeling, and she said the tightness was better, a bit, but still there, and that she'd felt a little dizzy when she stood up. I called 911. I know. I said I wasn't going to, and then I did, because when you sit beside your 84-year-old mother and look at the color of her face and hear the way she's breathing, something in you gets very clear very fast. I held her hand, and I talked to her quietly while we waited, and I told her the ambulance was just for being safe, that she wasn't in trouble, that I would ride with her and hold her hand the whole way. And she looked at me with eyes that had seen more than I will ever understand, and she said, "You're a good boy." I am 63 years old. I haven't been a boy in 40 years. But I'll tell you something. Sitting in that chair in that kitchen, I would have given just about anything to deserve it. The paramedics were good. Calm and professional and kind to her, which mattered. They got her on a stretcher and into the ambulance, and I climbed in beside her, and we went to Grand River Hospital, and I rode the whole way watching her face and holding her hand exactly like I'd promised. My daughter arrived at the hospital about 20 minutes after we did. She came through those automatic doors and crossed the waiting room and hugged me without saying anything, and we stood like that for a moment, the two of us, which is something we don't do enough. They kept my mother for several hours, running tests, monitoring. The cardiologist on call was a young woman who spoke slowly and clearly and didn't talk down to my mother, which I noticed. In the end, it wasn't her heart. It was a combination of a mild chest infection and some inflammation near the cartilage in her ribs. Something called costochondritis, the doctor explained, which can cause pressure and pain that mimics cardiac symptoms, especially in older patients. Nothing dangerous, but absolutely the right call to come in. My mother naturally said, I told you it was nothing, she said. You told me your chest felt strange. She said, I knew it wasn't serious. I said, good, I'm glad you knew. We drove her home in my daughter's car. We got her settled, made sure she had her medication, confirmed her follow-up appointment. My daughter stayed until evening. I left just before 6 and drove myself home in a cab again. My own car was still at the dealership, which I hadn't even thought about until I was already in the cab. My wife was in the living room when I got home. She asked how my mother was. I told her. She nodded and said that was good, that she was glad it wasn't serious. She sounded like she meant it, and maybe she did. I don't know anymore some days how to read her. I went upstairs and changed my clothes and sat on the edge of the bed for a few minutes doing nothing. Just sitting. The room was quiet. The streetlight came through the curtains the way it always does, that thin orange line along the ceiling. I kept thinking about one thing she'd said. I have responsibilities too. I turned it over in my head. I thought about what that meant, and what it was supposed to mean, and what it revealed about what she thought my morning had been about. Like taking a cab across a city to sit beside your mother in an emergency room was a hobby. Like it was something I was choosing for personal reasons that took no account of hers. She came upstairs around 9. She said something about the Hendersons coming for dinner on Saturday, and did I think we needed to pick up another bottle of the Malbec? I said whatever she thought. She said she thought yes. I said fine. She got into bed. I turned off the light. I lay there in the dark for a long time. The call I didn't expect came on a Monday, about 5 weeks after the hospital visit. My mother's neighbor phoned me, a woman named Glenda, who has lived 3 houses down for 30 years, and who I have known to be exactly the kind of neighbor everyone should have, and almost nobody does. She called to tell me she'd been watching, and she was worried. She'd noticed my mother hadn't taken the bins out on collection day, which she always does, and the porch light had been on for 2 nights running. She'd knocked and my mother had answered, but she looked pale and she'd said she was fine, and Glenda, bless her, did not believe it. I left work at noon. When I got to the house, my mother was in the bedroom. She hadn't told me she was sick. She had a chest infection, the real kind this time, and she'd been trying to manage it on her own with rest and the cough syrup she'd found in the medicine cabinet. She didn't want to worry me. She'd been sick for 4 days. I called her family doctor, who has a clinic on King Street, and explained the situation and asked if there was any way to get a same-day appointment. The receptionist was kind and fit her in at 3 o'clock. The doctor confirmed the infection and called in a prescription, amoxicillin, 10 days, plus something for the inflammation. I picked it up at the Shoppers on the way back and sat with my mother while she took the first dose. She looked small, sitting there on the edge of her bed. That's the only word for it. She has never been a large woman, but she's always had a bigness to her, a presence, a certainty. Watching her sit on the edge of the bed with her housecoat around her and her hands in her lap, she looked small. I didn't know what to do with that. I stayed until after dinner. I made scrambled eggs and toast, the only thing she said she thought she could eat, and I sat with her while she ate most of it. I washed the dishes. I made sure the heat was turned up, because old houses in February in Kitchener are cold in the way that gets into your bones and doesn't let go. I called my wife just after 6 to say I'd be late. She didn't answer. I texted. She replied 2 hours later. One word. Okay. I got home at 9:30. The house was dark except for the television in the bedroom. I made myself a sandwich standing at the kitchen counter and ate it in the quiet. There was a note on the counter about a package that had been delivered. Nothing about my mother. Nothing about how she was. No question. No let me know if you need anything. Just the package note and the quiet house and the sound of the TV upstairs. I ate the sandwich. I turned off the kitchen light. I went upstairs. I didn't say anything about it that night. I was too tired, and I've learned, over 63 years, that conversations you start when you're tired and hurt rarely end anywhere you want to be. But something had changed. I felt it in the way you feel a change in pressure before a storm. Not dramatic, not sudden, just a settling. A clarity about something that had been unclear for a long time. The thing about my wife and my mother is that the tension between them had never been about one big moment. That's what I'd always told myself. No dramatic confrontation, no unforgivable thing said, no event I could point to, just an accumulation of small distances. My wife not joining us for my mother's birthday one year because of a prior commitment that I couldn't fully remember now. The Christmas my mother had come to us and my wife had spent the afternoon in the kitchen with the door nearly closed. Phone calls my mother made that took a long time to get returned. I had always told myself these things were small, manageable, that both women were just different and that different was okay. But standing in my mother's kitchen watching her eat scrambled eggs with her hands shaking slightly from the fever, I thought, she has been alone in this house, sick for 4 days, and my wife knew I had been worried about her for weeks. And she had not once said, let's go see her, or should we check on her, or even do you want me to call her? Not once. I thought about that on the drive home. I thought about it while I ate my sandwich. I thought about it lying in the dark. The question I kept coming back to wasn't about my wife. It was about me. About what I had been willing to overlook for the sake of a smoothness that, it turned out, wasn't real. It was just quiet. Quiet and smooth are not the same thing. I should have known that. I'm 63 years old. I should have known that a long time ago. My daughter came to see me the following Saturday. Just me. She and her husband had plans in the afternoon, but she said she wanted to stop by in the morning. We sat at the kitchen table, and my wife had gone out to run errands, so it was just us, and my daughter put her hands around her coffee cup, the way her grandmother does, and looked at me and said, "How are you actually doing?" I told her the truth. I said I was fine, that I was worried about my mother, that I was tired. She said, "And the other thing?" I asked her what she meant. She said, "Dad, I was there that morning, when you called the cab." I nodded. I didn't say anything. She said, "She knew where you were going. She knew why." I nodded again. She said, "That's not about different personalities. That's about priorities." I've thought about that sentence many times since. She said it quietly, without anger, the way she says things when she's been thinking about them for a while. That's about priorities. 4 words. And she wasn't wrong. I told my daughter I appreciated her saying that. I told her I was still working through some things. She said, "I know. But Grandma isn't going to get younger, Dad, and you shouldn't have to do this alone." She left at 11. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time after she was gone. My wife got home at noon with groceries and a new candle for the hallway table, and said the traffic on the 401 was terrible for a Saturday. I got up and helped her with the bags. I asked her about her morning. She told me about running into someone she knew from her old office at the Loblaws on Hespeler Road. I listened, I made the right sounds. But I was thinking about what my daughter had said. And I was thinking about my mother's hands around the cup of tea. And I was thinking about 20 minutes on a kitchen floor. I went to see my mother the next Sunday alone. My wife had plans with her sister. I didn't ask her to change them. I drove out to Kitchener in the morning, picked up a few things at the No Frills on my way. Soup, crackers, one of those rotisserie chickens she likes, and let myself in with my key. She was up. Better. The antibiotics had done what they were supposed to do, and she had some color back, and she'd combed her hair, which I know sounds like a small thing, but when your mother is 84 and has been sick for 2 weeks, you notice. We spent the morning together. I fixed the latch on the kitchen cupboard that had been sticking. I looked at the bathroom and we talked, finally, without her shutting me down, about the grab bars. She said maybe just one, near the toilet. I said I'd arrange it this week. We had lunch. The chicken, some soup I warmed up, bread she had in the freezer that she'd made herself before she got sick. We sat at the table by the window where the light comes in from the backyard, and she told me about a book she'd been reading, a history of the CPR, because my mother is the kind of person who reads histories of railway companies for pleasure. After lunch I washed the dishes while she sat with her tea, and she was quiet for a while, and then she said, "Your wife didn't come." It wasn't a question, it wasn't an accusation, it was just a statement, quiet and even. I said, "She had plans with her sister." My mother nodded. She turned her cup in her hand. She said, "I've known for a long time that I'm not her favorite person." I started to say something, but she held up one hand slightly, the way she does when she wants to finish. She said, "That's all right. Not everyone has to like everyone. I've made my peace with that." She paused. "But you deserve someone who shows up with you. Not just for you, with you." I turned off the tap and stood at the sink for a moment with my hands still wet. She said, "Your father and I didn't always agree. We drove each other crazy sometimes, God knows. But if I'd called him and told him something felt wrong, he would have been through the door before I finished the sentence." She looked at her cup. "That's not a high bar. That's just the minimum." I dried my hands. I went and sat back down across from her. She looked at me for a moment with those eyes, clear and tired and completely honest, and she said, "I'm not telling you what to do. I wouldn't do that. You're a grown man, and this is your life, and I know it's complicated. She put her hand over mine. I'm just telling you what I see. I sat there with my mother's hand over mine in that kitchen, with the winter light coming through the window and the bread smell still faint in the air. And I didn't say anything for a while. I didn't have to. Some things you already know by the time someone says them out loud. You've known them for a while, tucked in a corner somewhere, waiting for the right moment, the right voice. My mother's voice has always been that for me. Not because she tells me what I want to hear, because she tells me what's true. I drove home that afternoon on the 401 with the windows slightly cracked, even though it was cold, because I needed the air. I thought about 27 years. I thought about what they'd been and what I'd thought they were, and what the difference was. I thought about what my daughter had said. That's about priorities. I thought about my mother saying the minimum. I thought about the one-word text. Okay. I got home just after 4. My wife was on the couch with a book. She looked up when I came in and she smiled the way she does, the comfortable smile of someone who has been home all afternoon and is pleased to see the evening starting. How was she? She asked. Better, I said. She's much better. She nodded and looked back at her book. Good. I hung up my coat. I went to the kitchen and made tea and stood there waiting for the kettle. I thought about what I wanted my life to look like in 5 years. I thought about what it looked like now. I thought about my mother at 84, alone in that house, making her own bread and shoveling her own front step, and spending 4 days sick without calling me because she didn't want to be a burden to anyone. She has never been a burden to me, not once in 63 years. Some debts you don't calculate, some things you just do because that's what it means to love someone. I poured my tea and stood at the kitchen window looking out at the backyard, at the dead grass and the snow along the fence line and the gray February sky. And I thought, something has to change. Not tomorrow, not dramatically, but something has to change, and I'm the only one who can change it. I didn't make any decisions that night. I want to be clear about that. These things don't happen the way they do in the movies, in one moment of clarity with the right music underneath. They happen slowly. They happen in stages. They happen in kitchens and in cabs and in hospital waiting rooms and in the quiet after the lights go out. But I knew something that night that I hadn't fully known before. I knew what I was willing to accept, and I knew what I wasn't. And that's where it started. Not with anger, not with a confrontation, not with anything dramatic at all. Just a man standing at a kitchen window with a cup of tea, finally willing to see clearly. That was enough to begin.